Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out the last part of Poisoner in Chief, part 4. The bang of the gravel that opened the doctor's trial at Nuremberg was loud and sharp. One witness wrote that it resounded throughout the large courtroom. Brief formalities followed. The chief prosecutor, General Telford Taylor, presented his opening argument at the rapt audience. All of the defendants herein unlawfully, willfully, and knowingly committed war crimes. Taylor began. All had carried out medical experiments without the subject's consent, in the course of which experiments the defendants committed murders, brutalities, cruelties, tortures, atrocities, and other inhuman acts. In excruciating detail, Taylor described experiments in which prisoners were killed by freezing application of mustard gas to wounds, surgical removal of bones and muscle, poison bullets, exposure to extreme air pressures, and infection with malaria, typhus, and tuberculosis. Then he charged that the infection with malaria, typhus, and tuberculosis, when he charged the defendants with hundreds of thousands or more murders through the systematic and secret execution of the aged, insane, incurably ill, deformed children, and other persons by gas, lethal injections, and diverse other means. The court reporter, whose job it was to record the history, wrote afterward that she was having a great deal of trouble remaining dispassionate emotionally and trying to keep my composure. Two well-known perpetrators of Nazi medicine crimes are not courtroom 600 at the Nuremberg Palace of Justice on that day, November 22nd, 1946. Heinrich Himmler had committed suicide in his cell. Joseph Mengele, who directed medical experiments at Auschwitz, had disappeared. Nonetheless, in the remaining 23 defendants who were worthy gallery, they ranged from Hitler's personal physician to doctors who supervised extreme experiments or mass killings at Auschwitz, Birkenwald, Dachau, Bergen, Belsen, and Treblinka, and other concentration camps. Among them was Kurt Blom. General MacArthur had received a shishi from punishment with a stroke of his pen, but recusing Blom's proved more difficult. He had held highly visible portions. Nazi crimes were well known, and Unit 731 could be hidden or glossed over because it had operated in remote Manchuria. But Nazi camps were in the heart of Europe. The system was processing suspected war criminals in Germany were more structured and difficult to manipulate than the ones in Japan. Blom's admirers at Camp Dietrich could not protect him from indictment. Instead, they concentrated on securing his acquittal. Blom had put up a spiritual defense. Addressing the court in fluent English, he concentrated on 2 points. First, he insisted that although there was much circumstantial evidence against him, including a letter from Himmler ordering him to supply toxins for sexual treatment of prisoners, no witness could be found to testify that he actually carried out the atrocities he wrote about, discussed, or was ordered to direct. Army study in which prisoners at the Illinois Penitentiary were infected with malaria so that its effects could be studied. He argued that these experiments and other that American doctors had conducted in prisons were no more unethical than his own. Blom's testimony was not at all helped in his case. The desire of scientists at Camp Dietrich to protect him was quietly communicated to U.S. military officers involved in the doctor's trial. Verdict was handed down on August 27, 1947. 7 of the defendants were sentenced to hang. 9 other received prison terms. 7 were acquitted. Blom was among the last group. Judges said that they suspected he had directed experiments on human beings but could find no clear evidence. The deck was clearly stacked, according to one German study. This trial, convincing proof of Blom's involvement in SS Dr. Sigmund Rascher's experiments at the Dachau concentration camp, was not presented. His role in experiments was malaria germs and poison gas could supposedly not be proven. Even as prosecutors asked that he had been sentenced, they must have realized that it would not happen. 42 days after Blum was found not guilty, the chief of the Army's Chemical Corps received a simple message from the Counterintelligence Corps in Germany. Available now for interrogation on biological warfare matters is Dr. Kurt Blum. Immediately, he dispatched a team of Camp Dietrich scientists. Blum welcomed them. He was reluctant to discuss his experiments on human subjects, the topics of were most interested them. At one session, though, he mentioned that he had investigated an operation in which Polish resistance fighters killed more than a dozen SS officers by squirting typhoid germs from what appeared to be a fountain pen into their food. What fascinated his interrogators, Blum had studied techniques of poisoning without detection. That seemed just the beginning of what he could teach his new friends. Finally, he made an offering, bring to me in America, and I will revolutionize your biowarfare program. At the core of Americans who served in the military and in intelligence agencies during World War II, the war never really ended. All that changed was the enemy. The role once played by Nazi Germany and the Imperial Japan was assumed to be the Soviet Union, and after 1949, Red China. In the new narrative, monolithic communism, directed by the Kremlin, was a demonic force that morally threatened the United States and all humanity. With the stakes so essentially high, no sacrifice in the fight against communism of money, morality, or human life could be considered excessive. This conviction, unspoken but almost universally shared in Washington, came to undergird and justify one of the most bizarre, covert projects ever launched by the government. In 1945, President Truman decided that the United States did not need a clandestine intelligence agency during peacetime, and he also abolished the Office of Strategic Services. 2 years later, he changed his mind and signed the National Security Act, which created the Central Intelligence Agency. That law, written in part by Allen Dulles, who came up in our last book, didn't he? A former OSS officer. Allen Dulles was a former OSS officer who created the Warren Report. An OSS officer created the Warren Report? Read on, Stephen. Who was aching to return to the clandestine world is loosely worded. It authorizes the CIA to carry out functions and duties related to intelligence affecting national security. It's always a national security issue, isn't it? And to use all appropriate methods in that pursuit. The CIA's former covert operations were in Europe, where the Cold War was most intense. In 1947, its officers hired Corsican gangsters to break a communist-led strike in the port of Marseille. The next year, it ran a successful campaign to prevent communists from winning a national election in Italy. It sent spies, saboteurs, and commando squads into the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. These were bold operations, but similar to others that secret services had been carrying out for generations. Then a sudden shock from Budapest gave the CIA and scientists at Camp Dietrich a new fear that set them on a new course. On February 3rd, 1949, the Roman Catholic prelate of Hungary, Cardinal Joseph Medinsky, appeared at a show trial and confessed to extravagant charges of attempting to overthrow the government, directing black market currency schemes, and seeking to steal the royal crown as part of a plot to reestablish the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Leaders of Western countries were outraged. President Truman denounced the trial was infamous. Pope Pius XII called it a serious outrage, which inflicted a deep wound and excommunicated all Catholics involved. Senior CIA officers reacted differently. They focused on the way Medinsky had behaved during the trial. He appeared disoriented, spoke in a flat monotone, and confessed to crimes he had evidently not committed. Clearly, he had been coerced, but how? At the CIA, the answer seemed terrifyingly obvious. The Soviets had developed drugs or mind control techniques that could make people say things they did not believe. No evidence of this ever emerged. Medinsky was coerced with traditional techniques like ill treatment, extended isolation, beatings, and repetitive interrogation. The fear that the communists had discovered some potent new psychoactive tool, however, sent a shockwave through the CIA. It also gave Count Dietrich a new mission. In the first years of the Cold War, II, scientists at Camp Dietrich found themselves out of favor. The reason was simple. American military planners had concluded that since the United States now had nuclear weapons, developing biological ones was no longer a priority. Political attention, along with the findings that accompanies it, had shifted decisively to nuclear-related programs that rendered Camp Dietrich almost irrelevant. Work slowed down. Many scientists were redeployed or allowed to return to civilian life. Those who remained were looking for a new mission. The Medinsky trial gave them one. Alarmed commanders at the Chemical Corps moved quickly. In the spring of '49, they created a secret team at Camp David, the Special Operations Division, whose scientists would conduct research into ways that chemicals could be used as weapons of covert actions. One of the first scientists to join the new division called it the little Dietrich within Dietrich. Most of the people didn't know what was going on in SO and got angry because you wouldn't tell them. The coercive use of drugs was a new field. The special operations scientists had to decide how to begin their research. CIA officers in Europe were facing a parallel challenge. They were regularly capturing suspected Soviet agents and were looking for interrogation techniques that would allow them to draw their prisoners away from their identities, induce them to reveal secrets, and to perhaps even program them to commit acts against their will. The Medinsky trial stroked their fear that Soviet scientists had already perfected these techniques. That stirred the CIA to urgent action. That is the end of that chapter, as I promised I would finish today. Finally, the next chapter is going to be about Albert Hofmann, the inventor of LSD, willing and unwilling subjects for their LSD program. Okay, we say thanks to all the crime members and anyone interested in these things I'm talking about. I would love to enjoy and subscribe and like and share. Thank you. Have a good day.